Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion on astrology, art, and adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore the current planetary alignments and offer insights for coping with change. Educational, informative, enlightening, the Turning of the Wheel is a welcome pause in your daily swirl of constant change. Through intelligent discourse, inspired guests, and educational segments, I will help to enlighten your knowledge of astrology and guide you to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Call in with your questions and speak with some of the greatest visionaries in the time-tested practice of astrology. Turning of the Wheel, Astrology, Art, and Adventure with Chris Flisher, each week on Turning of the Wheel podcast. Hello and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. As you know, this is a show that has a wide range of topics and interesting subjects that I like to delve into. I am primarily an astrologer and an artist, but I also like to get into other fields of metaphysics and spirituality and listen to what life is like on the real world with people who've had their feet planted on the ground. My next guest today is a fascinating discussion about a near-death experience, and I'll have her on in a few minutes here, but I wanted to remind you about my newsletter, which goes out every Sunday afternoon. And in there you'll find a couple of paragraphs of what's going on in the world today, as well as your interesting signs below that. I encourage you to do that. You can get it through my website, chrisflisher.com, or turningofthewheel.com. I always appreciate your support. I am up on Patreon. If you want to support my work, you can through that. And I'm greatly appreciative of you, because that keeps this great wheel turning. So, without further ado, I got an interesting email of the day from a woman. I often get a lot of emails from people who like to be on my show. And this one always caught my eye immediately, just simply because of the topic. And her name is Nancy Rynes, and she is the author of Awakenings from the Light, and its subtitle is 12 Life Lessons from a Near-Death Experience. And Nancy's here today to join me on the show. And welcome to the show, Nancy. It's great to have you on today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
So your website is nancyrynes.com, and Nancy just as Nancy, we spell it, and RYNES.com, nancyrynes.com.
Correct.
Her book is Awakenings from the Light, 12 Life Lessons from a Near-Death Experience. It's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and from her website as well. And so it's great to have you on, Nancy. And there's so much I've found out about looking into your past with your website, but I want to hear from you what your experience was like. I think you're the only one that really lived it. You're the only one that can really explain it and really tell it in your own words. So if you could just give us the story of what happened to you.
It was a big eye-opener for me. Before all this happened, I was what I would consider an atheist and a materialist. I didn't really believe in anything other than what we call this material reality, which, honestly doesn't really exist in the way that I thought it did. Mm-hmm. But back most of my adult life, I really didn't believe in anything other than this physical reality. I mean, I was a scientist, so I wanted to be able to measure things with, like a ruler or a tape measure.
Right.
And, and anything beyond that really just didn't exist for me. And it was in early 2014. I lived in Colorado at that time and was bicycling in my hometown in Colorado, just doing some errands around town. And it was in January, but it was a beautifully sunny, warm day. I think it was like in the mid-60s and very dry, so it wasn't, startlingly icy or anything like it might be back east. But it was a dry, beautiful day, and I went out for a bike ride and ended up with an incredible experience. I had gone into a traffic circle near my home, and a woman was driving in from the right-hand side from a road coming in from the right and didn't see me because she was busy texting on her phone and didn't stop, didn't even really slow down. And I was in a position with vehicles behind me that I couldn't get out of the way on my bicycle. So she hit me, and I ended up being dragged under her vehicle for... Oh, my gosh. Wow. Yeah, it was awful, for like 50 or 60 feet. And I remember all of it. Actually, the interesting thing is that I remember all of it from two different perspectives. So when I hit the pavement, what I call my consciousness or my soul or whatever split into two, which was, I thought at the time, very freaky. I didn't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
So there was a part of my consciousness that was really still in my body, and it was a very afraid, almost fight or flight type of consciousness. That animal survival consciousness was still in my body.
Sort of in a shock mode, I imagine, right?
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Didn't really know what was going on, just trying to hang on, really.
Yeah.
And survive. But there was another part of my consciousness, myself, that was outside of the accident, probably like 75 feet or so. Hard to tell, but it was, definitely outside of the accident. Watching the whole thing just happen.
Wow.
And that part of my consciousness was very calm and accepting and not at all afraid. And that part of me that was outside, I remember what it was, that the thoughts that I was having were, this is tragic and it's painful, but at the same time, it's exactly what was supposed to happen and everything will be okay. Huh. And that just kept rolling. And I like, it was like the two parts of me were dueling. That my animal consciousness or that survival part of myself was freaked out, but my higher self was totally at peace with what was happening.
And did you feel, so you felt as if you were sort of an observer in your own experience, as being almost detached in some way?
Right, right. Yeah, it was a definite sense that there were, for me, two distinct parts of me or my consciousness, one that was like at the human level or the animal level, and then a higher level of awareness, a higher level of consciousness. Some people might call that a soul or a higher self. I sometimes don't know what words to use, because words really can't, English words anyway, can't really capture the sense of what I experienced. So it's tough for me to put a label to it.
Right. But you did feel the sense of being as if you were, be able to be an observer of your own experience in this from a detached standpoint. Does imply, as if you said, your consciousness actually split. You were sort of dealing with the here and now, which was probably a state of shock, and then adrenaline or whatever kicked in, and then you're able to sort of view yourself from a detached view. Did you think at that moment in time, in either of those two consciousnesses, that you were going to be gone? Did you feel as if you're on the edge at that point?
Well, the higher self, or the one that was outside the detached part, knew everything was going to be okay and that I would be back and survive this. Mm-hmm. But the animal...
I'm actually breaking up a little bit. The animal instinct in you was what again? I'm sorry?
The animal part, the animal instinct, the animal consciousness was pretty sure that I was going to die. Uh-huh. That was pretty clear that I was really terrified of that, in that, still in my body.
So did you bounce back and forth between these two sort of, parallel universes, the reality of where you were and the pain that you were in, and then this sort of soft comfort as well? Were you sort of hopping back and forth, or could you secure yourself in either one of those two sort of worlds?
They were, the really weird thing, or at least weird in my thought process at the time, is they were both simultaneous. So I was kind of in both tracks at the same time. There wasn't really a sense of jumping back and forth. Mm-hmm. There was being in both at the same time, continuously.
Wow, just incredible. And then then from there, that you were then received care from medical personnel, emergency medical personnel, right?
Right. Yeah. Then the paramedics came, and when they started, manipulating my neck, they were trying to figure out what was broken and what injuries I had. That's when both of those pieces of my consciousness came back together in my body. And they ended up taking me to the ER within just a few minutes. And my injuries turned out to be really severe. I had, multiple broken vertebrae. One of them in my lower back was completely shattered. So luckily, I didn't get up and try to run, because I would have been a paraplegic. But
right.
And I had a lot of injuries to my neck and my rib cage, my pelvis. I had some internal bleeding. A cracked sternum and a a broken collarbone on my left side. But I had multiple,
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit here. Yeah, you had multiple injuries throughout your body as a result of being dragged by this vehicle. It must have been just a horrendous experience.
Right, yeah. So they ended up deciding that I needed to have surgery a few days later to stabilize my spine. They were going to put in titanium rods to make sure that everything healed up, vertically and straight, and to give me the ability to be up and mobile while everything was healing. And it was during that surgery a few days later that I actually had a short...
Again, I think you're breaking up. Could you just repeat what you said there? I think perhaps it's the connection. I'm not sure. Was during the surgery that you had a near death? That's when you also had the same problem, a same near death experience. Hello, Nancy, are you there? Yeah.
I think I'm going to have to call you back on the other line.
Let's try that. I'll put this out. I'll be here for you. Hang on.
I'll call you back on a landline.
That's good. Okay. Actually, no.
Okay.
Okay, we're back with Nancy. We had a little bit of technical difficulties there, but that's to be expected in this modern world. So you were telling us about your experience, how you were entered into the operating room post your traumatic experience, and you were at that point. What happened to you then?
Yeah, so actually during the initial part of the operation, I had some kind of a reaction to the anesthesia, and my blood pressure dropped to basically 0, and my heart rate went to 0, but I didn't know that at the time. What I experienced when they gave me the anesthesia was, instead of, drifting off like into blackness or kind of a gray, dreamless state, what I experienced is that I woke up, or to me, I woke up on a hillside, standing up, which was, in and of itself was a little freaky, that I was standing up. But I had this sensation of standing up on a hillside.
And where was that hillside? Was there something recognizable to you? Was it in your town? Was it a place that you knew?
It was not a place that I knew at all. It looked like a meadow around me with trees in the distance and low, like rolling mountains in the far distance with mist and kind of a bright blue, not really a blue sky, but more of a pearly blue sky, almost metallic blue. But I didn't recognize it from anywhere on this planet that I can tell. It didn't look familiar.
Did it look like a sort of a surreal landscape? Was it sort of, fantasy-like?
At first it was not. I mean, at first it was there was a little bit of like scintillating energy. And that's like the only way that I can describe it, almost like sparkly.
Okay, interesting.
And then as the experience unfolded for me over what seemed like, a few months, because it felt like I was there for a few months, I was able to see kind of more of what I would call like a freaky landscape. In other words, not bad freaky, but just things happening like energetically within the landscape around me. So I could, touch a flower or a tree or a leaf or something, and it would just burst into all these different colors.
So you said you were here. You felt like you were there for a couple of months. So time basically stood still in this transition period. Right.
Yeah. So there was no sense of time passing at all. And the reason I say 2 months or 3 months is I was there with some kind of a spiritual being, a benevolent spiritual being who said that we had known each other prior to my life here, and she was there to kind of help be a teacher for me. But the things that she did with me and the types of things that she taught me, and just how much ground we covered in this realm, whatever you want to call that realm, here on this planet would have taken about 2 or 3 months. That's why I say it seemed like it was 2 or 3 months, although there was no sense of time passing. There wasn't a sunrise and a sunset that would tell me, it's the start of a new day. It was just all the same. But just the amount of stuff that we did together here would take, 2 or 3 months.
Yeah. But you're sort of locked in this time. You're sort of suspended in time at this point. But yet the actual time was probably very minimal. Were you being revived, or was somebody attending to you, or do you not recall that from the operating table?
Well, the nurses later told me that I was being revived, and the amount of time that I was in physical distress in the operating room was like a minute or two at the most.
Okay.
So it wasn't long. The amount of time that my body was distressed wasn't really all that long. But when you consider going into whatever the spiritual realm is, there is time does not make sense over there. It's just different.
Time doesn't really exist. It's sort of it's not a measure because you're not in anything around you that has any context for measure, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah, it doesn't. Nothing changes, so there isn't really a sense of time having passed. So, and what my friend, my guide, told me is that for her, being a spiritual entity, all times exist simultaneously.
Right. The past, the present, and the future all exist in the same time frame, right? Yeah.
Right, right. And so that for us, when we transition over, even if it's just for a little bit of, for us maybe a few minutes, it's a big shift. We don't really know how to wrap our brains around this. All of a sudden, oh my gosh, time doesn't exist the way that we thought it did. So that's hard. It's hard to explain. It's hard to kind of get that concept over to people. That 2 minutes here for me equated into what might seem like a couple of months.
Yeah, that's just incredible, because that does support the whole idea that time really does stand still in that realm, because time is a relative measure that we use in our lives because we see things around us that give us a sense of context. We see the sun rising and setting. We see all these things happening. So we have a framework in which to place the idea of time. But when you're in a suspended time and when you're in suspended animation like that, basically the past, the present, and the future all exist in the same moment, and you're able to go either direction, right?
Right. Yeah. Now I didn't exercise that option much at all while I was there. I was too consumed with learning these things that my guide was teaching me. But I have the feeling from her that I could have touched on some of those other, what we might call the past or the future.
Yeah.
Now, she did touch on a little bit of the future for me, so she helped me access a little bit of it for myself so that I could see some of the things that might be coming up in my life. Not a lot of really detailed stuff, because I really, most of us don't want to. When we get right down to it, it kind of takes the fun out of life if we know exactly what's going to happen when it's going to happen.
Exactly. No, that's true. That's true. Even though that's one of the things we all desperately want sometimes, we don't necessarily need that either. I know. Did this? Did the spirit guide have a form, or was this just a voice you heard, or was there some sort of physical presence that you remember? Could you describe that person, that spirit guide?
Yeah, and well, she came to me looking, and I say she, but only because it was convenient. So the form that she took was a form that was convenient for me to be able to interact. She let me know that her real form was not a human form, but that she took it's vaguely human female form that looked to be a little bit taller than me. And she took on kind of an aura of long, dark hair. She had kind of dark skin. And she had clothing obviously is meaningless there, but she had put, in her vision of herself, put on this piece of clothing that kind of looked like, I don't know, like a linen mixed with a silk. It was very drapey and beautiful, but it also glowed at the same time. So it was almost like an energetic garment. But the funny thing is that I never was able to catch a glimpse of her face. So she had a very vague face, just a general sense of a female form. But she told me that she was wearing this to make it more palatable for me to converse with her.
Oh, I see. So she sort of maybe put herself in that situation so that you would be more recognizing of her. You would recognize her perhaps better.
Right.
Yeah.
And be a little less afraid maybe from the human, we're still carrying some of that human fear with us when we first cross over.
Of course.
So she wanted to kind of ameliorate some of that and and give herself a form that looked familiar to me. Now, it was obvious that she was benevolent. She had a beautiful, loving presence, and she welcomed me with this beautiful, loving energy that was incredible. And
did that relax you and make you feel comfortable? Was it sort of a way of comforting you at that moment?
It was. It made me feel very welcome, and took away some of the anxiety that I might have felt being in this situation, because it was pretty clear within moments of me waking up in this place that something had happened in the operating table. I mean, I had a feeling that I had died on the operating table. I mean, that was what was in my brain was, okay, well, I guess I'm going on to the next life, and everything I thought I knew was, wrong. I didn't expect to end up in a place like this because I didn't believe in it.
Right.
But, when it finally sunk in that this was real, then I started to roll with it, especially when she showed up and embraced me and welcomed me. She showed me some things about my pre-birth memories. She kind of helped me access my pre-birth memories of basically being surrounded by multiple other spiritual beings, very benevolent, beautiful beings who were my friends and were helping me plan out this incarnation. Which I was like, whoa, what's this all about? I had no idea that I had agreed to anything. And she showed me, me agreeing to do specific things before I was born. And one of them was having this crash, this really horrendous accident, and then, dying for a short amount of time and then going back into my life. Yeah. And so at the beginning of this experience, in the afterlife, or whatever you want to call that, they don't really call it the afterlife because it's our true home. So they consider this an aberration.
Oh, I see. So that's more like a return. It's more of a return to where and being on Earth is simply a journey or a departure in itself, where we're sent to learn something, perhaps, and then we return.
Right. Yes, learn something or do something or help other people learn. So there are many reasons that we could come here, but this I knew was not my true home. That was, and so they kind of, she and some of my other spirit friends kind of chuckle when we call that the afterlife, because it's really our true home. Right. So we have it a little bit backwards.
Right. I guess that's just because of our perspective on Earth. We don't really know the other way around, because we can only assume that that's what happens after life. But until you get there, you don't really know. Right. When you were there, did you feel as if you had gone and died? Did you feel as if this is where I am? Is it sort of that I've heard this sort of phrase about this warm light enveloping you and sort of going through this, sort of vortex of comfort and sort of different experiences that define what a near-death experience is like. Was your experience similar to that?
Well, I didn't have the tunnel, but when I think it's only about 40% of the people that have been documented with a near-death experience actually go through a tunnel. But I ended up, in that beautiful, welcoming, peaceful state, and it wasn't really lights so much as it was pervasive, loving energy that kind of came through me from everywhere, and just the lands, what you might call a landscape. And again, that was constructed partially by me and partially by the spirit realm itself for me to be comfortable. It wasn't necessarily, a real place like here. Right.
Yeah, it's sort of a fantastical sort of place that was derived perhaps from memories of your own vision of what Earth was like and what maybe heaven was like. Who knows?
Yeah, and it was just a comfortable place for me to be. So again, so that I would be relaxed and at ease and be able to experience the absolute unconditional love and acceptance for who I was, even though I knew that there were some things that I regretted having done or said. I mean, we all do. We might unintentionally hurt someone, or
of course. So was there a recollection of events in your life? Did you get that sort of light my life flash before me kind of experience?
In a way, I did. It was done a little bit different than maybe a lot of people would experience. So for some people, they see like a movie projected on the air in front of them. For me, I was taken to what looked to me like a pond or a small lake up in the mountains, and I saw little images on top of the pond surface, like I call them little YouTube videos. So there were like dozens and dozens of these scattered across the surface of the pond, so I could see individual interactions that I had in my life with different people. And some were positive, some were negative, and I could focus in on one and then experience that both from my perspective and the other person's perspective.
And what was that like? Did that shift your view? Did you then reflect and say, "Wow, I wish I hadn't done that," or "This is like," or "This is I wish I'd done more," or did you have that sort of, exchange with this situation, this sort of experience?
Well, it was probably the biggest aha moment that I had while I was there, and I say that because I was allowed to not only see what was going on from the other person's perspective, but I could feel what they were feeling. So I'll give you an example. There was a time when I at the time consciously recall this years prior to my accident, I had gone into a grocery store during a busy Christmas season. It was like a few days before Christmas, and the clerk, the checkout clerk, was really frazzled, had a long day. She was just had been crazy busy all day and was tired and kind of cranky. And I just, I looked at her, and I could see this playing out on the pond surface. I looked at her and I said, thank you so much for doing what you're doing. I know you've had a hard day. I really appreciate your work. And she just smiled and beamed. But in that moment, I got to feel her appreciation for me appreciating her. So it was kind of like, wow, I can see how we're all connected. I got to feel her joy at being recognized.
Yeah, because so few of us get that kind of feedback from people. And when we do, it's really necessary because it's unsolicited, and then it's really genuine at that point in time. So here you are offering somebody, a pat in the back at a time when they need it the most. That was very, sort of altruistic thing of you to do for her and help her. It was very nice of you. But so you're able to recall these experiences. So you must have had equal experience with things that perhaps were not quite so pleasant in your past. It may perhaps, little things that you may have done.
Yeah. So there was one experience that I was shown where I had said something kind of I wasn't necessarily trying to hurt someone, but I was being kind of cranky and a little bit mean to my sister. And this is when I was younger, like I think it was in my teen years, and those whole sibling things.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But I was able, to see me and experience me being kind of cranky and mean. But then I was able. My sense was that I was experiencing my sister's hurt and pain for me.
And how did that work? Was that because you were able to be more empathetic, or because you were shown how she was feeling? You actually experienced her feelings.
I actually, my perception is that I experienced her feelings because what I was told and shown was that we're all connected. There really isn't a separation amongst all of us. So.
I agree with you there. Yeah. So did this leave you with a different view of your? Well, obviously we'll get into that in the next part of the show. Let's not go there. We'll do it after the break because that's probably a bigger conversation in itself. But this experience of when I look at your website and I see some of your spiritual art, you'd mentioned this person. Are any of your paintings there illustrative of the people of the person that you met, this sort of spirit guide?
Well, I think they're more. I haven't illustrated her per se because I wasn't really sure what to do about the not seeing the face thing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a tough one.
That's a tough one because then we can't, as humans, it's hard for us to make a connection with that image if we can't see a face.
But did you feel that this person had physical form and a voice and a tone and heat that was given off by them, or were they just sort of like, what was this entity like?
She was actually a little bit more ethereal, so she wasn't really like giving off a body heat. there were times when I could touch her and feel like a physical presence almost, but then there were other times where I could almost see through her. So she was so ephemeral.
Wow.
And it was, to me, it was more, she was mostly energy who was, in and out of a form. Although she did say that she had been incarnated several times into this physical life here on Earth. So she was not unfamiliar with, being in a human form.
So did you get the impression from that this is that our lives are a long cyclical adventure that it continues on, and we just have various forms for them, various different manifestations of that?
It can be. We can come back and come back. From our perspective, we come back and come back. From their perspective, it's kind of all happening at once.
Oh, because time does not matter, right? Of course. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. But for us, yes, there's a sense of having come here in the past and will be here in the future. Although what she told me is that there are some beings who choose only to incarnate once into a human body, and then that's all they need, and they don't do that ever again. And then there are some that never incarnate into a human body. So it seems like there's a mix of modus operandi as far as coming into this planet. Mm-hmm. So some of us only come in once, some of us, and I think it seems like it was the majority of us come back multiple times. We're here multiple times.
It's probably the few people who don't come back because they probably already have evolved to the place where they don't have to come back. Their lesson has been learned, or their work's been done, perhaps.
Right. Or, she said they could actually go on to another physical existence somewhere else.
That's crazy. We are talking today with Nancy Rynes, Rynes. Her website is Rynes, NancyRynes.com. And she is the author of Awakenings from Light, 12 Life Lessons from a Near-Death Experience. And the book is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all the other outlets for books, as well as her own website. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll be right back, and we're going to get into some of the details of what she has learned from her experience, because I find this to be just an amazingly fascinating experience. So we'll be right back in about 2 minutes.
What is your destiny? Where are you going? What is your real purpose? Do you know? Do you want to know? Of course you do. It's your duty to yourself. We are all here for a reason, and we all have great potential. Discover all of this and more with a professional astrology reading. My name is Chris Flisher, and I can help you. Discover your strengths and work on your weaknesses, and live your life to its fullest capacity. Based on your birthday, birthplace, and birth time, an authentic astrology reading will allow you to live your life to the fullest and reveal your true purpose. Only real astrology can give you real information. It is your destiny, and it is your path. Write me at chris@chrisflisher.com and book a reading today. Or call me at 978-393-1036. That's 978-393-1036. www.chrisflisher.com.
Astrology is the science of spirit, and it can serve as an invaluable aid in making the difficult choices in life and seeking truth in all the directions we choose. It holds the potential to allow each of us to evolve to our highest potential. It is the logic of the universe, the code of existence, and the pathway to true wisdom. It is our duty to draw from it the instructions for our lives and to live them to our fullest potential. As the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed.
Hi, your host, Chris Flisher here. I've been producer and host of this podcast and radio show for the past 10 years. My goal has always been to provide enlightening, progressive, and logical discussions about where we are as a species and how we move ourselves further down the road towards our greater potential. I believe astrology provides a great tool for observing our progress and awakening our consciousness to becoming a whole, better, and more complete individuals. I have sought to invite the best contemporary guests, thought leaders, and progressive minds to discuss topics that concern us all, regardless of your beliefs. Consider making a contribution through PayPal to help keep the great wheel turning so that I can continue for the next 10 years along the same enlightened path. As always, I thank you for your support.
Okay, welcome back to Turning of the Wheel. Thanks for being with us. We're talking today with Nancy Rynes. Her website is nancyrynes, RYNES.com, one long word, nancyrynes.com. She's the author of Awakenings from the Light, 12 Life Lessons from a Near-Death Experience. And this is just the most fascinating story I've heard in a long time because of the severity and the trauma and the drama that went around your whole experience and your experience during this time. So when you were in this realm, as we were talking beforehand with this spirit guide, did you get messages from them about what was your purpose or your lesson or what your instructions were?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just geared toward me. So when I talk about purpose, it was my purpose,
right,
not necessarily everybody's purpose in general.
Of course, yeah, it makes sense.
But for me, one of my main reasons for being here was to learn how to really truly be loving and to be love, not just to feel love, but to be love in this physical life here, and to be a bridge or a channel, not a channel like a spiritual channel, but a way for people to understand what that bigger divine or universal love is like. Maybe
you're a messenger or a conduit of sorts.
Right, a conduit is a really better term. The channel thing really wasn't it, but conduit is a good term. But yes, being a conduit. For myself, first of all, learning how to be loved for myself and my family and my friends, but then also kind of being an example of what that can look like, because it's sometimes challenging for humans to really grasp that, and especially it seems like now in the time in our history, a lot of people have told me that it seems really challenging. So I'm glad that I can be an example of what that love might look like, and at least in a little way. I'm granted, divine love or, universal love is so much bigger than just me or you or, the rest of us. But if I can be just a little bit of a conduit for that and a little bit of an example, that was one of the things that I'm supposed to do here.
Why do you think when you listen to that, when you make that idea, put forth that idea, what makes you think that why is it so hard for love to exist in our material world here? Why is this such a concept that requires you to go through this in order to find that?
Yeah, I think for me, it was a requirement for me. It doesn't, not everybody has to go through. In fact, I hope that people don't have to go through this, right, because it's pretty traumatic. The thing that I had gotten was that I had an agreement to separate myself from this divine consciousness. Some people might call it God, or some people might call it, the universal consciousness or whatever. But part of my agreement for being here was to be a non-believer, was to separate myself completely from that so that I could experience what that felt like and how hard that was. And I think when we come here, it's easy for a lot of us humans to get caught up, in the day-to-day stuff and in the attachment to things that really don't truly mean anything. So the attachment to achieving money or status or wealth or success, it's those attachments to seeking certain things and needing to have things that really our culture has told us are important, but at the spiritual level really aren't. And we get kind of drawn up into this drama, and we forget that there's something bigger than that. It's easy to narrow our focus down and get caught up in this human drama for success and wealth and fame or whatever, and get attached to having to have these outward items that indicate that we're successful.
Yeah.
But it oftentimes pulls our attention away from what's truly important. That doesn't mean that we can't achieve it if we just change our focus. We can, but we're so focused in on things that spiritually aren't really all that important, and it becomes almost like a drug. We get caught up in that drama of success or wealth or, the drama of daily life.
It really is quite a dilemma, and it's quite a paradox when you think about what you've been through and where the value is. So this really, aside from that, this really shifted your view of life. And during this time, so you were on the operating table, they revived you, and then when you came out of that, did you remember all this? You obviously did, but I mean, what was that like? And did you just speak to people around you and say, "My gosh, you don't know what I've just been through"? I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, so I came back as soon as they woke me up in the recovery room. I woke up. I knew that I was no longer there in that divine realm, and I woke up crying and screaming, and I kept calling out for this person that I had just spent all this time with.
Right.
And the nurses were a little freaked out by that, but I didn't tell them what had happened. I realized all of a sudden that, wow, okay, they're probably going to think I'm crazy, so I better shut up. So I didn't tell anybody for about a day. The next morning, the chaplain came in to my room, which was interesting in and of itself because I really hadn't wanted a chaplain at all to come in and talk to me because I was an atheist when I was admitted. So I didn't want that, but she showed up, and I was so grateful that she showed up because I felt like I could tell her what happened. So I did tell her, and so I'm so grateful that she understood exactly what had happened. She knew that I had died, and she said, well, you've had what we call a near-death experience, and it was real. You had an experience of the afterlife, which she called the afterlife. And, you were given a chance to, as she said, my heart was broken open so that I could experience love in a new way. But for, basically my old life was shattered. And she said, it's going to be up to you now to kind of make sense out of this for yourself.
Huh.
And I didn't tell anybody else for a few days, and then I started telling my family. But I was really concerned that a lot of my friends were scientists at the time, and I was really concerned that they'd think I had gone off the deep end.
Well, I'm wondering if did you ever stop to think or consider that perhaps you were chosen for this because of your background? Or do you think this was you were singled out because by being one extreme and seeing the other side, you were more of you could be more convincing in your observation of this?
Yeah, actually, there was no coincidence. Everything was for a reason. So the whole part of me being a scientist and an atheist was for a reason, and I was chosen for a reason because I had a different perspective. I didn't have any truly preconceived notions of what should be, when we died.
Right.
That I went into it not necessarily like questioning or doubting, but just open to being curious about what was happening.
Right. I mean, needing empirical data, empirical evidence to sort of prove something, and then you're getting you're getting served this completely unusual experience that's just life-changing. It must have been, I can see why that'd be a good link for you in some ways because you're obviously a good messenger for that.
Yeah, and it allowed me, I think, having that scientific background allowed me the space in my own heart and my mind to try not to force the experience into a preconceived idea of what should have happened. So I kind of took it at face value, and I didn't, especially at the first couple of years, didn't try to put terminology to it that was might be specific to a particular religion or something.
You don't want to be an evangelist and try to drag everybody along with you and say you've got to believe me. You've got to. So you sort of use that scientific portion of your mind to address the topic in a very sort of academic and maybe logical method, so that people might be more inclined to understand your experience. I mean, it does give you credence in some way.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that I was told that I was meant to be a bridge between and among different worlds, not just this world and the next, but within our own existence here, to be a bridge amongst different people.
Right.
And I feel the strong need or desire to do that. So that's why when I speak, I try my best not to I try best to be inclusive and not exclusive is
Right.
what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because this experience isn't necessarily specific to any one religion. It really crosses the boundaries, and
Of
I want
course.
to remain that way.
Right. I mean, a logical person would come to the conclusion that there is no one religion. It's all the same. It's simply a matter of how it's interpreted, and they have various different sort of rituals and beliefs and standards that go with them. But they're all the
Right.
same. It's all, each religion, each major religion has the same basic tenet, even though it may not look that way on the outside. But the idea basically is founded in love and you know, and sort of mutual respect for each other. Those are seem to be common tenets through all the major religions.
Right.
But you know, your experience in this is now what kind of a scientist were you? What was your background?
Geology and archaeology, so very, very physically oriented.
Yeah, earthbound. Yeah, really much so, very much so. And so, you must have been able to draw. There must have been a part of your intellect that drew on your knowledge of those various sciences and was able to place them in a way that sort of made sense, especially being an archaeologist. I mean, we look back at the archaeology of Egypt or whatever when they find these tombs and we see what it was like in there. It almost seems as if they knew that there had to be this afterlife, and then there was a reason to be respectful of what was to come. And so that gives you a certain unique impression, especially since archaeology is founded in history and it's sort of got a forensic quality to it. You were able to perhaps take your forensic mind and apply it to this situation in a way that gives you this ability to have these lessons. And what are some of the major lessons that you think you took away from this? I mean, what's the one thing that, I mean, you mentioned that love is universal and we all have it, and it's what binds us together. What else have you learned as this, and how have you changed your life as a result?
Yeah, so some of the things that I learned were the importance of really putting together or becoming a part of a community. So you can build a community around you. Mm-hmm. You can join communities, but really one of the biggest things that I learned was just that building that community around you, because we're all connected, you know, like we said before, but here in this human life, we need those connections. We crave those connections. It gives the life its meaning.
Yeah, it does.
Most of the time. And a lot of us have let all of those connections go. We've, you know, with this whole modern age of, you know, being, quote, connected over the internet, we forget that in-person connections can be so beautiful and so welcoming and so helpful. So that was a big one for me. Learning how really to exercise my power of choice in each and every moment. So this is bound up in being aware and conscious in each moment that we do have choices in our lives of how to treat ourselves, how to treat each other, that the decisions that we make impact ourselves and everyone around us. It's like a ripple effect. So when you make a decision, it isn't just you that's affected by that decision. It's everyone around you, and in some respects, spiritually especially, your decision can affect a huge number of people just on an energetic level.
Everything is sort of it's reflective. You know, we reflect out and we reflect in, so that reflection of what we're giving out is a message that permeates perhaps farther than we realize.
Right. And that's so important. For me, it's that piece alone, I think, has been the most valuable, because before this experience, I would say that I was one of those people who was kind of stumbling through life on autopilot. I wasn't really conscious about my choices, about being in the moment each and every day. I was usually worried about what was coming up or, you know, in regret about what happened in the past. I wasn't really living in awareness in the moment. And as a result of, it wasn't instantaneous, but after this experience, there was an evolution of me over the next year or two of really learning how to be in this moment and aware and conscious and making conscious choices. You know, that doesn't mean I blow off planning for the future or something. I still do that, but my awareness is right now in this moment. And it's kind of interesting because my awareness has since expanded too. So it's because my energy isn't spent on worrying about what's coming up or in regret about the past, it's like my awareness of this moment has gotten huge and expansive, and it's beautiful. There's a peace in that I haven't experienced before. The peace in this moment, the peace in being here and now, and doing the best job that I can in each and every moment.
But when you say that you're, I mean, and I fully appreciate the idea of being in the moment. I try to do that myself, but we all get wrapped up, as you say, in the worldly distractions of the material plane. But, when you were in that other time, when you were in that place where you had, died perhaps and saw the glimpse of time, you were able to see the future, the past, and the present all as one. And yet when we are on the planet Earth in our earthly plane here, we're only limited by the past and the present. We can see the weather forecast, but we can't see, we can't tell if we're going to get hit by a truck or a car like you did the next day. And so this reflection on time, do you think that having this experience allows you to sort of, maybe not prepare for the future, but at least, I guess you're not preparing for the future because you're spending your time more focused on the present, correct?
Yeah, in a general way, I do prepare for the future to be responsible for myself and my family. I make plans, and I don't blow off the future by any means. But the majority of my energy is really focused in on doing, I guess, taking the right step for right now, following that heart sense that, yes, this is the right thing for me in this moment. At the same time, I used my discernment. We have our analytical minds for a reason, and part of that is to, give a little bit of weight or depth to what we feel our heart wants, or what our heart is telling us to do, or what that gut sense or soul sense is telling us to do. So for me, it's become a matter of merging those two into a life that makes sense. So for the most part, I really listen to what my intuition or my heart is telling me for that moment. And, honestly, it's more right than my mind ever was before.
And in what way? So you feel like you're more, when you say you're more in tune, you're more, it's more right now than it ever was before. How is that? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, in the past, I would completely disregard any intuitive sense that I might have about anything that was happening. So, for example, the morning that I was going to set out on my bike ride that ended up in this experience happening, I had one of those intuitive knowings before I even got on my bike that I should put my bike back in the garage and go back in the house and do something else and not go out for a ride that day. There was that, and I never normally had that kind of thing happen, but there was that sense of put your bike back in the garage and go back in the house.
Interesting.
And I ignored it because it didn't make, mental sense to my brain. And it turned out that it was right.
And do you think that had you known what you know now, would you have paid heed to that?
Today I do, actually. When I get those hits like that, I really pay attention to it because for the most part they've been right.
How do you know the difference between just being a little bit paranoid or worried because things have, versus the reality of it all? I mean, how do you know? We all have moments we say, I've got a bad feeling about this, and then things turn out fine. And then how do you know that what's real, what's not real? Maybe you don't. Maybe that's just part of the mystery.
Yeah, I think for me it's been a matter of testing it out over the last few years. So I tested out on kind of silly little things like, on my drive to work. When I lived in Colorado, I used to drive to work, and I had multiple ways that I could go to work. And typically, my typical route was usually no traffic at all. And once in a while, there would be a day when I would just wake up and know that I had to take this other route. So I would take the other route, and as soon as I got to where I went, was going to get to the office, I would look up on my phone, and only after I got there would I see that there had been an accident on my normal route and that traffic was backed up for 3 miles.
Yeah.
So I tested out as much as I could, and now I'm to the point where I don't really test it anymore, but I can usually tell by how I feel inside if it's just a typical human fear, or if it's a true intuition, because the typical human fear will have a very anxious, almost desperate kind of feeling to it. And those, typically I will say, I hear you, but I don't need to buy into that fear right now. If it's an intuitive hit, I don't feel afraid of it. It feels like absolute knowledge. Yeah. And those I listen to. But I can tell by just how I feel inside.
Are you still an atheist?
No. I mean, I'm certainly not a materialist. I don't know necessarily what to call all of these things. I mean, I believe in what some people might call a God or a universal consciousness or something like that.
Some force, some sort of spiritual force, but doesn't necessarily have form and function and ritual that goes with it, like you'd find in a conventional church, for example.
Right. Yeah. Like the image that we had in Catholic, because I went to a Catholic grade school, of the big white bearded Caucasian man sitting on a cloud. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right, of course not. No. Yeah, right. That's sort of a misconception. But you do have this sense that you are firmly convinced that we are all connected, and that there is does this give you the sense at the end of the day that there really is nothing to fear in death?
Absolutely not at all. Nothing. No. And I used to be terrified of death. Absolutely terrified. I mean, it would literally keep me awake at night because I was so afraid of death.
Interesting.
And now I know it's just another journey. It's a journey back to home, really.
Yeah. It's interesting because we think of birth, and there's a great phrase that says, when we're born, we come out crying, and everybody around us is laughing and is joyful because we're here. And then when we die, everyone is crying, and we who are dying are joyful because we're leaving. That's sort of that old, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but there's that, the element of there that, so it is another journey. In many ways, death is a birth of a new kind.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I had the privilege of attending to some people who have passed on, in their last days. And I can tell you what, every one of them, granted, they were. It was natural death. There wasn't anything traumatic about it as far as being in an accident or anything. But they were transitioning at the end of a long life, and they were excited and were just enjoy. They'd get glimpses of what was coming, and then they'd come back to this present. And it was so amazing for me to be there with them, seeing that they were joyful about their upcoming transition.
Right. So is this something that you might do with, say, in hospice or something like that, where you could actually help someone through that transition? Is that something that you might consider doing?
Yeah. I've done this, personally on an individual basis, but I think it's a beautiful way to be a volunteer in hospice too. Just to be present with someone in their final days, and
So this is very liberating in some ways to you, because it must have just you not only do you now a great appreciation for what we have before us in our daily lives, but you also can operate in a realm where you're not fearful of and worrisome perhaps of what happens beyond.
Yeah, there's once at least for me, once I let go of the fear of death, it opened up all of this energy I had for living now, and all of the excitement for living now. Even if I have what some people might call a failure or a missed opportunity or something, it's still like, yay, it's still life. I'm still having fun. I'm still learning. I'm still enjoying. So it's all just part of, for me, almost play, almost fun.
I guess what it is. It's what we don't know that always bothers us. So as with anything, familiarity is a comforting thing, and many people in their worlds, stay in jobs and marriages that they don't like because they know it's familiar, but they don't know what awaits on the other side. There may be something very valid that's even better on the other side, and your life story sort of exemplifies that, because you didn't know what was on the other side, and now you have this whole new view of what it is perhaps like on the other side. Do you think that you gained any sort of, this is going to sound like the wrong word, but I don't know what else to call special powers or not? I don't mean that, but I mean, do you have some sort of sense of premonition or intuition that you think has been increased? Is your antenna more finely tuned for what life is about?
In some ways, I think it is, and it's odd how it's been. odd from my old perspective of how it's kind of rolled out. The wider perspective that I've been getting is more, again, a depth of intuition that I think had been there before, but I wasn't allowing it to really unfold for me. But I do have what kind of some interesting abilities to maybe not necessarily cross over and go back to that at will, but certainly tune into that other realm at times and kind of reconnect with it from time to time, which I wouldn't have expected, before. So for me, it's not really closed off anymore. I can access some pieces of that realm when I choose to.
Yeah. But it's interesting have you spoken with other people who've had this experience, a near-death experience? You must have sought them out. And how do their experiences compare with yours? Do you find a certain commonality there that it links them, and you come away with the same sort of aspect or at least perspective on life?
So a lot of them, yes, a lot of the basics are there, kind of like, the basics amongst religions. Well, the basics a lot of us come back with are the connections that we all share. So we're all connected. We're all love, that everything is love. And some of the most profound things that we experience as NDEers is what we call ourselves, is that profound love and acceptance that totally blows us away, that we can't imagine that kind of peace and love and acceptance. Oftentimes we'll have life reviews. I think it's about 60 to 70% of us report having some kind of a review of our lives where we also experience our decisions from that other person's perspective. Oh. So a lot of us have that. This is not just me. So a lot of us have that in our life reviews where we're given the ability to feel what other people feel. So that's not at all uncommon. Some people, a lot of folks usually learn one or two things and then are sent back. I think basically I joke to people that I needed a lot more remedial education than most people need.
Yeah, I can
so
imagine.
I was there for a little bit longer, but right. It's not that we're necessarily special or anything. We're not. We just might need a little bit different education than other people do.
Well, it does give you a different idea on life. There's no question. It gives you, I think, a much richer viewpoint of life and what life has to offer and what you can offer back. So it has obviously changed your day-to-day life in some way because you have a greater appreciation. You've even shifted your whole life in some ways. Are you still a scientist, or is this your pursuit?
I'm not really a scientist. I'm a scientist in that I still think like a scientist,
right.
But my job isn't in the sciences anymore. So I'm doing my art. I'm doing this public speaking and writing, and then I also have work that I do part-time as well, just to kind of, fill in the gaps. But that's, again, it's more writing work. It isn't science-based stuff. Yeah. But I don't think the scientists can ever leave. That's just that's how I'm structured.
And when you speak with your old friends who you shared a sense of sort of atheism or science with them, scientific knowledge with them, how did they respond to your experience? Were they still skeptical, or they said, wow, maybe she's got something here?
Well, unfortunately, some of them have chosen to opt out of being associated with me, which I understand. We just let them go very gently because they just weren't able to stay friends with me because they thought, wow, this is really weird. I can't really do that. There are some scientist friends who are very interested in hearing what I experienced, for the most part. But then it's like, yeah, well, it's just another experience that you've had. So let's go on and continue being friends and doing stuff together. So that we don't really go into huge discussions about it.
Right.
But we're still friends, and I still love them to death, and we're still friends. But and if they have questions about it, I certainly answer. But it's not something that I force upon anybody. I'm still love them for who they are, and we're great friends. But it's just not something that we share. But I have a whole new group of friends now that I share all this stuff.
I can imagine. Yeah. Do you ever long for that time to be back with that spirit person and to be able to sort of have an update and say, wow, thanks for what you've done for me? I mean, do you ever long to sort of reach back to that time?
I I miss that sense of immediate connection with her and with that whole place that I was in, because it's all connected. But at the same time, I know that it's just around the corner for me. So I'm focused in on this life, because that's, for me, the most valuable thing. It's too easy for me to get distracted by spiritually, but I mean distraction by all that other stuff. So I stay focused in on what's important to me, which is the love, it's the compassion. Here now, it's art now, and I know that the rest of it's coming soon.
But that sort of gives you, I imagine it must be a comfort in some ways to some people to know that this has happened to you and what you can share back, because it would give comfort to someone who's lost someone. I think there's a sense of that as well. You're able to offer words of comfort to saying, this is not a bad thing for them. It's bad for us because you're left behind, which always seems to be the hardest part of death to accept, is those you leave behind. If you've got children and grandchildren or whatever, you don't want to leave them behind. These are your loved ones. And yet you're being asked to go. People go. And, my wife died about 17 years ago, very tragically, over a long term of a brain tumor. And I know that, I had tried to talk to her about what her experience was like, but she was not conversant. But I wonder, what that's like. We have this dread of fear of dying, as you mentioned yourself, and yet we try to find comfort in a way that we think religion would provide for us. But religion is really nothing more than just a made-up story in some way, because I tend to be like you in some ways. Not that I'm an atheist, but I just don't fall into the traditional religious forms. And I see there's a greater good and perhaps even a greater vehicle or force, or, God with a small g, as you mentioned. But I mean, I think in this capacity, the one takeaway that you really bring to this conversation, and as your message to give to the world, is that it's okay to go. And, it is not the fear that perhaps that you once felt. And I guess the greatest piece you've learned is that this is really, we are all love, we are all connected, which is probably the most profound thing that could have happened to anybody.
Yeah, it is. It is a comfort. It has been a comfort for a lot of people that have followed me, especially for parents who have lost a child. I can imagine. I had a lot of people check in with me over the last couple of years from that side of things, and it gives, from what they've told me, it gives them a deep sense that it's okay, even though it might be hard for them to deal with, that they know that their child is okay, that everything is good with them, and they're loved. And that's what they really wanted to know is, is my child being loved? I'm like, yes, absolutely. That is the realm of love for sure.
Were you ever able to look back on your experience? Were you able to see people who you may potentially have left behind? Did you see them in this period of time? Did you have any sort of looking down at them, seeing people who you love, like your children, your husband, or whoever?
I knew I wasn't married at the time, and I'm still not. But I was able to reflect on my daughter, and she was the one person that I was really reluctant to leave. Yeah. As would make sense for any parent.
Of course, yeah.
But at the same time, I knew that if I did leave, she would be well taken care of. Her dad is a great dad, and she's very well loved, with her other family members. So I knew that she would also be very spiritually taken care of, because I got the sense that her spiritual friends were always looking out for her. So I knew that she would be taken care of. And I was also concerned about my sisters, because I'm very close with them. And we'd already lost one of our siblings to a car accident. And I was concerned that, they wouldn't take this very well. Right. And I think maybe in some respects I was more concerned about my sisters than I was about my daughter, because I knew that she was so wonderfully loved and taken care of. But I was concerned about how my sisters would react. But again, I knew that from that higher perspective, or that wider perspective, that in the end, it would be okay with them as well.
Yeah, just amazing story.
Yeah.
Really, just amazing story. It's wonderful to hear your story, and I greatly appreciate you coming on to tell me it and to tell my listeners that, because I think it shows that there is hope and that there is a bright light somewhere in the future of our lives, and that we need to be more cognizant of our time on this earthly plane, because like you say, the distractions and getting caught up in all of the drama that happens in our daily lives with all of the news and the phones and all the stuff that we deal with, I think it gives us a great sense of comfort that there is a greater purpose. When this is my last question for you, is sort of, do you believe in God? And I don't mean God with a big G, I mean God with a small g. And I think that term God applies to sort of a universal energy or consciousness that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Is that what really shifted in you?
Yeah, I would say yes, and I the way that I describe it is a consciousness so big and vast and connected that I can't even begin to wrap my brain around what that's like. But there's definitely, from what I sensed, I mean, I'm putting this into a human paradigm, but
right.
But the sense was that it was what I would call a universal consciousness, or a God, if you will, that is so loving and connected and intelligent and vast. I mean, just the vastness of it is astounding to me.
Wow, just amazing.
Yeah.
So I think that gives us great hope, and it gives us reason to be perhaps more cognizant of our time on the planet while we're here, and maybe to strive to be a better force for good as we move on through this.
Yeah.
So that's great. My guest today has been Nancy Rynes. Nancy Rynes, Rynes is her last name. Her website is nancyrynes.com. She's the author of Awakenings from the Light, 12 Life Lessons from a Near-Death Experience. She died and came back and has left her with a renewed sense of the greater purpose of life, and one that I think that speaks to a very optimistic and hopeful future and world for us.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Nancy. It's been great talking to you, and I really appreciate your story and admire what you've done.
Thanks a lot. I've loved being on your show today.
Oh, good. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Thanks so much for coming on. Nancy Rynes,
All right.
once again. Thank you, Nancy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to Turning of the Wheel with your host, Chris Flisher. To schedule a reading with me or to order artwork, you may visit my website at www.turningofthewheel.com. That's www.turningofthewheel.com. Or you can call me at 978-393-1036. Thank you. And as always, be open to possibilities.